Yeah, good. Okay. Um, Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Lyons. I'm working with my colleague Subhash Kumar, who's just sitting there in the second row. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something that actually works a little bit with what the previous speaker was talking about. So we're talking about optimizing the energy mix for power system that's in the context of the electrification of heat and transport and industry and the upshot of new data centers in Ireland. So Ireland is a small country. If maybe you're not familiar with it, the west of Europe. We have a particular interest in data centers, and I'm going to explain that over the next few minutes. Will use this one.
Use this go down. Use this go down. Yeah. Sorry, I will double check.
Is it?
Okay, now it's okay.
It's okay.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. So, I'm going to do a short introduction. I'm just going to talk about our methodology. Then I'll talk about the scenario development. And then I'm going to present some results and discussion of the analysis that we did. And then just have a few concluding remarks and some acknowledgements. So that's what I'm going to talk about over the next few minutes. So first things just to paint a picture for what the energy landscape is in Ireland. Like every country, it has its own individual characteristics. Ireland is an island nation with a population of about 7 million across the whole island. And we import most of our energy, right? We're beginning to produce renewable energy now, but by and large, fossil fuels are all imported into the country. So energy security is quite a thing that we think about. So in Ireland, electricity consumption has increased by 2.5% per year since 2014, and it's reached 30.6 terawatt hours in 2022. Services are the largest part of our energy landscape with 47%, followed by households, which consume 30%, and industry, which is about 21%. So in common with a lot of our neighbors in Europe, we have binding targets with respect to renewable energy in both overall and in individual sectors. So our objective was to have 16% of our final energy consumption to be generated by renewables by 2020, which was met, and of which 40% was for electricity, 42% was the actual figure we achieved, 12% for heat, and 10% for transport. So we missed our target for heat, and we just about made our target for transport. Greenhouse gas emissions, unfortunately, increased by 5% in 2021, which is about 12% above the 1990 level. So in contrast to a lot of our neighbors across Europe, our population is actually growing, and there is increasing car ownership. So keeping the lid on things like transport emissions is quite challenging. And in Ireland, our per capita electricity consumption is about 6,000 kilowatt hours. Per capita electricity consumption is about 6,000 kilowatt hours per year, which is a bit above European average. That's related probably to maybe larger family sizes, larger homes that we tend to have, and the distributed nature of our population. So, yes. Now, in that context, we have a lot of data centers. So Ireland's the last English-speaking country first language English-speaking country left in the European Union since the exit of the UK in 2016. And data centers across the EU is responsible for 2.7% of the EU metered electricity consumption, and that's expected to increase by 3.2% to 3.2% by 2030. Ireland, it's a much, much larger proportion of that. So in 2023, 21% of our electricity consumption was consumed by data centers. And that's up from about 14% in 2021 and is 4 times what we had back in 2015. And potentially we're looking at maybe 30% of our entire electricity consumption is going to be consumed by data centers by 2030. And what's driving this? Well, we don't know how much we're going to get to by 2030, but we do know that there's significant drivers for this increase in electricity consumption by data centers. So grid connections is something that might actually be something that might hold this up, because we're an electricity system looking to attract more and more renewables. Putting data centers into this small grid is actually something that's going to be really, really challenging. Government policy. We're looking to attract more industry to the country. Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, they all have their European headquarters in Ireland. The government is looking to make sure that these guys stay having a significant footprint in the country, and having data centers with these organizations is something that's quite attractive and keeps people employed in the country. The big mega trend in the data center industry at the moment is the rise of generative AI. And I think Bloomberg New Energy Finance forecast that by 2027, the data center energy consumption across the planet is going to double by 2027 in comparison with 2023 figures. So generative AI and things like ChatGPT, etc., they're putting a huge requirement in terms of data centers and the ability and that computational power across the world. And of course, another factor that's impacting on the growth of data centers is sustainability and CO2 emissions. As we add more data centers to our electricity system, it's going to put more and more pressure on us to meet our targets with respect to renewable energy. So there's a clear need to understand the impacts of future data center capacity on the energy system. In addition to the annual data, we also identified that granular, daily, and seasonal and regional levels of energy consumption with respect to data centers is going to be important. And this is, because data centers, their consumption is not linear throughout the year. In wintertime, particularly, the amount of energy that they consume is a little bit less, and that's because the requirements for air conditioning or refrigeration, etc., and the cooling systems associated with data centers is significantly less. In summertime, a different scenario arises. And these peaks and troughs associated with the data center consumption interact with the overall electricity system and potentially interact with the maintenance schedules of the electricity operators. Also, there's an interaction with renewables, a renewables-dominated system, where we have a lot of wind. We may not find that we have a significant, we may find that the peak of wind may not coincide with the peak of data centers. And also there's a look to maybe potentially modify the operation of data centers so that they're more aligned with the requirements of the energy system. And this would be incentivized with tariffs or other financial instruments to encourage behavior of data centers that is more sympathetic to the operation of the electricity system. So I'm getting the hang of this now. So what we use to perform the study, we use a platform called Energy Plan. It's a deterministic input-output computer model. The deterministic model optimizes the operation of a given energy system based on a set of inputs and outputs defined by the user. And it's developed both for national or regional planning strategies. And it incorporates heat and electricity as well as the industrial sector. So it's a whole system, energy system model, not just the electricity system or the transport system. So it considers all these different elements. The general inputs are demands, renewable energy sources, energy station capacities, costs, and the different regulation strategies. And the outputs are energy balances, resulting annual energy productions, fuel consumption, import, export of electricity, and total income, including from the exchange of electricity across boundaries. So this here, if this works, so this is an overall view of what the energy plan model looks like. So we have res electricity here as an input into the system, and you can see that this feeds into the outputs here coming from combined heat and power. That feeds into heat pumps, feeds into cooling devices, electricity storage system. The red lines here represent heat networks. So there's a little tile down here that would explain all that. So all these different elements are fitted together in the overall energy plan model. So, as I said earlier, this is a summary of the inputs and outputs of the system. So we have demand data coming in. We have supply capacity, which is the energy supply. This could be in the form of renewables, fossil fuel plant, etc. And then we've cost data, because any optimization relies typically on a cost function to perform the optimization. And our outputs then are CO2 emissions, annual costs, and primary energy demand. So we need assumptions though, because obviously the future, we need assumptions about what's going to happen in the future and forecasts, etc., to drive our analysis. For this analysis, our time horizons between 2022 and 2030, and the year 2022, which we've taken our base data from, is taken as our base year. In terms of costs of assets, we've used a discount rate of 5%. We make an assumption based on data that we've received from the transmission and distribution system operators of 7.4% on average. And we have general key assumptions regarding population, per capita income, GDP, economic growth rate, and the number and the size of households. So we have figures from our Central Statistics Office which inform these numbers. So other things that feed into the model in terms of targets, we have ambitious targets as a country for renewables. Okay, and so at the moment we have 5 gigawatts of onshore wind, and that's based on a system at the moment which we have a peak load of about 5 gigawatts. So looking to 2030, we're looking to put 9 gigawatts of offshore wind in the Atlantic, and some in the Irish Sea. We're looking, sorry, I got my numbers mixed up there. 9 gigawatts onshore, 5 gigawatts offshore, so that's in the Atlantic and the Irish Sea. We're looking to install about 8 gigawatts solar, and have some demand side flexibility of 20 or 30% of the overall energy demand of the system. We have targets for retrofitting homes, so this kind of correlates with some of the earlier speakers. We're looking at district heating. We're looking also at the development of a biomethane resource in the country of 1.1 terawatt hours by 2030. We have used assumptions with regard to, informed by the Climate Action Plan, with regard to the share of carbon in natural heating, carbon neutral heating, reduce energy consumption in industry through energy efficiency by 10%. And then there's a set of assumptions there that you can read regarding transport. And what we have done in our assumptions which is probably important here, is we have assumed that we can mandate reductions in the energy consumption of data centers, which will result in an overall energy reduction for the whole energy system of between 0.81 and 3.6%. So that equates to about a 26% reduction in the consumption of the data centers in comparison to what they are today for the same amount of computational power. So, and this here is a summary of the different scenarios. I talked to there. Oh, what did happen there? Okay, we're back in business. Okay, so I talked about the 26% and the energy efficiency in the data centers. We've considered 3 scenarios of low, medium, high demand. And so this is informed by the transmission system operator, which runs the electricity system in Ireland, and their forecast. So, there's a lot of crystal ball gazing when we're looking into the future, especially in the context of very, very challenging targets with respect to renewables, very, very challenging targets with respect to upgrading our buildings, the adoption of heat pumps, etc. So it's important to have a set of scenarios that considers all those separately. So next slide here. So this is a few of the results. So when we consider the renewable energy production in 2030, without adopting the energy efficiency measures for the data centers, we can see there that there's, this is the wrong way around, unfortunately. This is actually the graph when we don't adopt the electricity energy efficiency measures, right? So we can see that we've had a lot of 25.45 terawatt hours of energy production, and 21.6 in the medium demand, and 19.2 in the medium demand. So this graph here on the left is where we have adopted the energy efficiency measures in the data centers, so that the amount of renewable energy that we need to produce in all the scenarios is reduced. And that's because the data centers are now using less energy. So to meet our targets with respect to renewables, we can achieve it with a smaller capacity renewable fleet, and we produce less terawatt hours from renewables, which is maybe a bad story in some ways, but it allows us for a more cost-effective pathway towards reaching our targets. This is the CO2 emissions in 2020 when we adopt the CO2 emissions. And again, I think the captions here are swapped around. And the story here is that when we adopt the energy efficiency measures, we drop the amount of CO2 that we're emitting. Okay, so the captions here are incorrect. Apologies for that. But in each scenario, when we adopt the energy efficiency measures for the data centers, we're reducing the amount of CO2 emissions, right? And we've reduced the cost also of delivering the targets that we're setting out in the climate action plan. And so that's important. This graph here illustrates the same kind of thing. So if we can reach our targets in a more cost-effective manner, those costs are passed on to the consumer ultimately. And the lower the cost that the transition to a low carbon economy is delivered, the less resistance we will see to it. Because at the end of the day, it'll be Ireland Inc. or the community of Ireland or the people of Ireland who will be delivering this low carbon transition. And it's incumbent on policymakers to help us achieve that in the most cost-effective way, because those costs ultimately are borne by everybody who lives in the country. Okay, so and in each case, you can see where we have the energy efficiency put in place for the data centers. We've reduced the overall costs. That's like 14 billion euros, 13 billion. So you have a saving there of 400 or 500 million euros in terms of the energy infrastructure needed to deliver a high demand scenario with the data centers in place on the assumptions, I think, just 30%. Okay. And so because, as I said before, that this is a granular model, what we've built is we've developed data sets for wind, solar demand, which reflects throughout the year. So we've been able to look at what are the flows of energy into and out of the energy system, potential flows into and out of the energy system, what the maximum potential energy flows that can be coming into and out of the system by using this granular data rather than maybe taking snapshots, particular points in time of maybe a winter scenario, a summer scenario, or an autumn spring scenario. So we've much more visibility of what's happening on the power system and what's happening on the energy system by using granular data sets, which we've derived from existing data and also extrapolating out based on GDP growth figures and targets that have been set out in the climate action plan. So this is for these particular graphs are for the medium demand scenario in 2030, and what the average net import into our energy system under this scenario is about 3 gigawatts, which is pretty substantial. Similar analysis was done for the high demand scenario, and we figured that the average demand input is about 5 gigawatts. So that's the import-export, and that balance can either be achieved by building additional interconnection capability, but also can be achieved by using technologies such as maybe hydrogen or thermal storage to reduce the requirements for the import into the system and use the additional capacity or the additional generation that we have, store it and use it for periods when we have a lack of generation. So I'm not sure, I don't have a clue how I'm doing on time. These are kind of key takeaways. So electricity consumption doubles under the high demand scenario in comparison with the reference year 2022 from 11.74 terawatt hours to 23.45 terawatt hours. So we're considering here that basically there's a huge uptake in electric vehicles. There's a huge electrification of heat on the system. So heat pumps are being adopted across the system. Ireland unusually has about 80 80% of in the rural areas, which is oil fired. So we rely very little on renewable heat. So in the high demand scenario, high demand electrical scenario, a lot of our electrical heat, a lot of heat demand and a lot of our transport demand is moving towards the electricity system. The medium scenario results in a 21% emissions reduction, and in the low demand scenario, CO2 emissions reduced from 44.62 to 34.55. And a lot of that is due to the additional installation of renewables on the electricity system. So what we're trying to say, though, the key thing that we found is that mandating energy efficiency technologies, data centers, will significantly reduce the total system cost to achieve the electricity system decarbonization targets. Energy balance requirement, which is something that can be worked or can be managed either through things like energy storage or through additional interconnection capability, is reduced significantly under the low demand scenario. So the energy balance requirement needs to be met by those technologies that I mentioned earlier. The study provides, we believe the study provides the evidence base for policymakers as well as data center owners and other stakeholders to develop policy and strategy in the context of decarbonization targets and increased requirements for data center worldwide. So, the focus of our study is here. Here, I'm actually in the United States, is in Ireland. The findings are probably applicable anywhere in the world, which is seeing an increase in the penetration of data centers on their energy system. And this is only going to grow. Everybody's using mobile phones. There's an increasing reliance on generative AI and other power hungry applications on the computing side and the ICT side for lots of things that research does and what other organizations do. So it's thought provoking. All right. So thank you very much for your time. Just want to say thanks to everyone, particularly Subhash. So this is our team back in Cork, and particularly Subhash for the work done on this particular paper. So thank you.
Good question. So I'm curious about generality about, for example, now the simulation space of island case, right? So I guess it should be, useful for the European case, but how do you think about, is it, for example, for your kind of findings, is it also the same case for Asia and also for United States?
So what there will be
I guess the data center, the infrastructure, maybe for example in Ireland, is it more small data center? Not pretty sure. For example, I know in the United States we have more huge cloud-based data centers. Maybe some difference between modeling.
No, our data centers are cloud-based data centers as well.
Oh,
so there's no difference really. From that point of view, probably in other jurisdictions where the weather conditions are different, you're likely to see maybe a greater fluctuation in the data center load. So obviously in a country which is hotter or maybe colder, you're going to see a larger fluctuation in the data center load. In systems that are less dominated by renewables, maybe if there's a nuclear capability on the system, it's going to be different. We're an island system, so we're probably more tightly constrained than a lot of other countries in some ways. So, but I suppose the key takeaway is, the world figure was like 2.3% going up to 3.1%, I think, or was that the European figure? So data centers are going to be an increasingly large part of the electrical systems throughout the world, wherever we want to locate them. And they're going to have a significant impact on countries' ability to achieve their renewable energy targets, because as you increase the load, you're going to increase the amount of renewable energy you're going to need to service that load and make it increasingly difficult to meet whatever target you might have set.
yeah, of course, I understand. So only thing that in too much matter. What is system to have and model is they can wait for it, I'm not sure. Did you compare with some other search, for example, today? So guess like I think it's 20, 21, 23%. So if you compare this number with some other studies,
21% penetration of the data centers.
Yeah.
But like we are very high.
we have more than, oh, I said,
Yeah.
we are considering 30% in 2030.
Yeah.
This is-
And it's because I think it's partly due to our geographic location as well. You know, I think my son told me a stat about Ireland that there's only two countries in the world that have never experienced a temperature above 35 degrees Celsius, which is I don't know how many Fahrenheit. I'm sorry about the conversion. And it's ourselves, Ireland and Iceland are the only two countries in the world that never experienced temperatures beyond 35 degrees C. So that's quite useful from a data center point of view.
Okay, thank you. We invite our next speaker, Professor Rahman, and the team within on three want to learn next institute program for letting management to work with the secretary and
I have here in the PPT. I can leave it here, isn't it? Okay.